All right. Well, good morning. Again, I'm coming to you via video this morning. And if you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn to 2 Kings. We're going to be in 2 Kings today. So just to give you some background, I'm going to send you to read chapter 11. That's the chapter you can turn to. Kings documents once Israel goes into the land. That was all the way back in Joshua. They go through this period of the judges, and we heard about Ruth, how this basically sets up the line of David. But then they get this king. First one is Saul, and they start in the land forming this nation that God had promised them all along. It goes really well with David for a while. Then David has a son named Solomon, and things start to kind of unravel towards the end of Solomon's reign. He does some bad things. And then as you keep going, there's a civil war that happens, and the nation actually splits up into two. And so you have Israel, the nation of Israel, and then you have the nation of Judah. And they are both having different kings at this time, and it's kind of like a civil war. Or not a civil war, but it's at least a division. So you have Judah in the southern kingdom and Israel in the northern kingdom. And so you have these kings, and the book of Kings actually goes back and forth between them, and sometimes it could be really confusing. Some even have like very similar names. Like you can see here, there was a Jehoram in Judah, and there was a Joram around the same time in Israel. And then you have a Ahaziah here, and there's a Ahaziah there and there. It can get very confusing, so sometimes I had this chart just to kind of like orient myself to where we're at, and as you're reading through it, it can help to have that. But we're right here. We're at this part of the story, in this line, in Judah's line, and we're picking it up there. It's where the Bright curriculum has us today. So just so you know, that's where you're at in the story. I want to send you to go ahead and read chapter 11. Hopefully you can catch enough of it to kind of follow what's going on. And just read it, get a gist of it, ask good questions, and then I'll kind of walk us through the passage. All right, go. Okay, let's go ahead and start working through this passage. When Athaliah, Ahaziah's mother, saw that her son was dead, she proceeded to annihilate all the royal heirs. So this is a woman here who is getting rid of all of the heirs. And this would be in the line of David and Judah, so this is trouble. Jehosheba, who was the king Jehoram's daughter and Ahaziah's sister, secretly rescued Joash, son of Ahaziah, from among the king's sons who were being killed. So I know that was a lot of names. Like the first time I read that, I was like, I need to see a chart or something. But basically what you have is Jehosheba saving Joash from Athaliah. Okay? So she, who is Joash's aunt, is rescuing Joash from Athaliah, who is killing all of the heirs, which would seemingly include her own sons and grandsons, which is crazy. But Joash's aunt saves her here. And, okay, hopefully that helps you a little bit. And put him, this is Joash, and the one who nursed him in a bedroom. So he was hidden from Athaliah and was not killed. Joash was in hiding with her in the Lord's temple 6 years, while Athaliah reigned over the land. So you have 6 years, and where is he being hidden? In the temple. Somewhere, I guess, Athaliah would not be, or scope out, really, because probably she served other gods. She was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, wicked duo in the Book of Kings. And Jezebel was a foreign woman who led Israel astray with foreign gods. So Athaliah also probably worshipped other gods, and so neglected the Lord's temple. And so great hiding place. But there you have it. You have Joash hiding for 6 years in the temple, all because of Jehoshaphat. And let's keep reading. In the 7th year, which if you know your Bible, 7 is an important number. And usually when it's telling a story, if it comes to like the 7th day, the 7th year, or the 7th cycle, it's usually like a climactic event that's about to happen. You can think of creation. You can think of when they marched around Jericho for the walls to fall down. The 7th march kind of did it. So 7th year kind of clues us into a climactic moment that's about to happen here. And you have this guy, Jehoiada. I don't know. However you pronounce it, just run with it. But he sent for the commanders of hundreds, the Kerites, and the guards, and he had them come to him in the Lord's temple, where he made a covenant with them and put them under oath. He showed them the king's son, who was in the temple, Joash, and commanded them, "This is what you are to do. A third of you are to come on duty on the Sabbath and are to provide protection for the king's palace. A third are to be at the foundation gate, and a third at the gate behind the guards. You are to take turns providing protection for the palace. Your 2 divisions that go off duty on the Sabbath are to provide the king protection at the Lord's temple. Completely surround the king with weapons in hand. Anyone who approaches the ranks is to be put to death. Be with the king in all his daily tasks." It was detailed, but basically what this priest, Jehoiada, is conspiring is this way to have Joash, who he calls the king, I believe 3 times here. He calls him the king in this section. Or here's the other one. So he's already calling him the king. He says, surround him and protect him. And again, we don't really understand all the different, like, this gate and that gate or whatever. But at the very least, what we know is that Jehoiada is providing this protection for the king. And he's doing it at a very kind of like critical time where there would be a changing of the guard, so this wouldn't be super suspicious. But that's why he's being detailed here. Verse 9, so the commanders of the hundreds did everything the priest, Jehoiada, commanded. They each brought their men, those coming on duty on the Sabbath and those going off duty, and came to the priest Jehoiada. The priest gave to the commanders of hundreds King David's spears and the shields that were in the Lord's temple. Then the guards stood with their weapons in hand, surrounding the king, from the right side of the temple to the left side, by the altar and by the temple. Jehoiada brought out the king's son, put the crown on him, gave him the testimony, and made him king. They anointed him and clapped their hands and cried, "Long live the king." So what has Jehoiada done here? He's basically worked it out so that Joash can be crowned king and anointed. And so he's kind of situates this whole circumstance to secretly anoint Joash king behind Athaliah's back while she's on the throne. So when Athaliah heard the noise from the guard and the crowd. And what's the noise she hears? Is this crowd chanting, "Long live the king." She heard all this clamor, and she went out to the people at the Lord's temple. Again, she looked, and there was the king standing by the pillar according to the custom. She sees that he's enthroned. The commanders and the trumpeters were by the king, and all the people of the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets. Athaliah tore her clothes, which is a sign of it's sadness, disappointment, but it's just a intense emotion around it. That's kind of what the Hebrew Bible and the ancient Near East attached to tearing of clothes. And she screamed, "Treason, treason." Kind of call it what it is. That is a little bit. It's been a conspiracy of sorts to get her out of the throne. But we know that this is according to the Davidic line. And so it's not really treasonous. This is how it was supposed to be. Then the priest Jehoiada ordered the commanders of hundreds in charge of the army, "Take her out between the ranks and put to death by the sword anyone who follows her." For the priest had said, "She is not to be put to death in the Lord's temple." So they arrested her, and she went through the horse entrance to the king's palace where she was put to death. And there's this cool drawing I found of her being put to death. But I thought it was interesting. All of this, the Lord's temple is a big feature in all of this. It's mentioned quite a bit. I think it's in chapters 11 through 12. It's mentioned 19 times, the Lord's temple, or the Lord's house, the house of Yahweh. There's something there, right? And that they would give this specific instruction for her not to be killed in the temple. Seems pretty interesting. Then Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord, the king, and the people, that they would be the Lord's people, and another covenant between the king and the people. So all the people of the land went to the temple of Baal and tore it down. So this verse, making a covenant, they're kind of renewing. There's some language here where it's renewing the covenant. And specifically the language goes back to 2 Samuel 7, which if you were here when we talked about that, where God made a promise to David that he would have an eternal throne. And also Exodus 19. There's some clues there. So the Lord makes a covenant again with the people and the king, reinstitutes this allegiance, this loyalty that they are to have to him. And what does that do? It creates hostility, disruption to other gods and other allegiances and loyalties. So what do? They take down Baal and his temple. They smashed its altars and images to pieces, and they killed Matan, the priest of Baal, at the altars. Pretty intense. But when we have given our loyalty, our covenant allegiance, love, devotion to Yahweh, idolatry or other loyalties or sources of devotion cannot be there. So then Jehoiada the priest appointed guards for the Lord's temple. He took the commanders of hundreds, the Kerites, the guards, and all the people of the land, and they brought the king from the Lord's temple. They entered the king's palace by way of the guard's gate. Then Joash sat on the throne of the kings. So Joash is now king. All the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet, for they had put Athaliah to death by the sword in the king's palace. And Joash was 7 years old when he became king. This is the youngest king, beats out a guy named Josiah, who you read about later in Kings, who became king at the age 8. But this all seems very promising. This is good. There was a moment where the Davidic line was in jeopardy, where it seems to be like God's promise to him that he would always have an heir on the throne is about to be broken. Like a Davidic king is not is being wiped out by Athaliah. But one child is preserved, and he's made king. So this is a great story of providence and how God keeps his promise. One of the things I just wanted to tease out, one of the things that I've noticed, and I pointed out as we were reading through it, was just the prevalence of the temple. And not only here in this chapter, but the next chapter, the temple seems to be this big theme. And they're very concerned about what happens in it and whatnot. So I just want to kind of frame up what the temple is, kind of according to the Bible. And And basically what I think we should think of as the temple is a place where God's space and human space overlap. And this is what we could call sacred space. Place where God's presence and human presence come together. And this is what the temple was all about. It was a place, it was the house of Yahweh where he dwelled. And it was a place that enabled the people to be with Yahweh, their God. But the temple is just kind of one iteration of that in the biblical story. It really starts all the way back in the Garden of Eden, that this was God's intention, that he would be with his people and that his space would intersect or overlap with their space. The Garden of Eden was this pocket where God's dwelling could be with humans dwelling. And of course, that gets fractured by sin. God sends them out from the garden, from this sacred space. But as he works through the people of Israel, he continually provides these places where he could be with them. And the tabernacle is one of those. And I think you read, Exodus 19 through 40, you see all these instructions about how God can basically build this sacred space with his people again. And it's filled with this garden imagery. There's a lot of links in the text back to the Garden of Eden. And the same with the temple. The temple also has all these links of imagery back to the Garden of Eden and whatnot. But these were both just sacred spaces for God to be with his people. So that's why it was so important to them. Now, what we see throughout the rest of the story is Jesus is called the temple. He calls himself the temple, or he is God with humanity. Emmanuel is God with us. And he uses a lot of this language of temple. Even in John 1, it says that Jesus came and tabernacled among them. So Jesus is this picture of human and divine space intersecting in his own body. And when he ascends into heaven, he sends the Spirit, and it's so that the very Spirit of God could be with his people in the church. And Paul will say that the church is like the temple. You are the temple. And he's not saying just act really holy or proper or whatever when he talks about that. He's saying God is with you. The very space of God is with you in your space. Your very body has become this temple. So the temple is now reflected in the church. Each one of us, we are like little houses of God. And now we also look forward to a day where the book of Revelation describes this Jerusalem, this temple-like garden coming down out of the sky onto the earth. And it's like this greater revelation of God with humanity. And so we also long for that day. And that's what new creation is about. It's actually going back to this Eden place where God is with us and we are with him, and his space is our space. So that's why, look at this. This is just a mess. But that's why the temple is such a big deal to Israel. And it gives us a lot of kind of thematic clues that we can pick up on and apply to our Christian life, because we should think of ourselves as the temple. And we also look forward to a new creation with some of those same themes. Okay, it was a little bit of a rabbit trail, but something we can pick up on. All right, let's read chapter 12, and then I'll send us off with a time of reflection. But so this is all set up Joash, and now we're going to read more about Joash's reign. Okay, so in the 7th year of Jehu actually, Joash became king, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. Once again, it's one of those numbers that you're used to in the Bible, probably symbolizing something important. Solomon reigned for 40 years, so maybe this is linking him with Solomon. But it's all very promising. It's all very promising. His mother's name was Zibiah. She was from Beersheba. Throughout the time, the priest Jehoiada instructed him. So Jehoiada was like kind of what you would say a mentor to Joash. But Jehoiada plays a really key part. I mean, Joash really didn't do anything. He was still like 7 years old, wasn't taking much initiative. A lot of the initiative, if not all of it, came from this guy, Jehoiada. So he keeps mentoring and instructing and teaching Joash. And then this seems to be good because Joash did what was right in the Lord's sight. So, very promising, very good, but we get this one clue of something ominous. And it's this word yet. The high places were not taken away. The people continued sacrificing and burning incense on the high places. So it's the high places remained. There were, I think, 5 kings, along with Joash, that received this positive evaluation. They said they did what was right in their minds, yet they didn't take away the high places. I think the only 2 kings that actually take away the high places was a king named Josiah and Hezekiah. So just point being, Joash isn't doing something totally out of the norm here, but we do see that it's not good. It's not good throughout the story that kings didn't get rid of these high places. So what is a high place? Here's a picture. There, that explains it. You now know what a high place is. Basically, these were places of worship. Before there was a temple, ancient Near Eastern cultures would just find places on high. Mountains were often associated with the gods. And so they would find these high places, and that's where they would sacrifice or do religious activity on these summits or on these hills. But once you have a temple, you don't need these high places. So these were now illegitimate places of worship in Israel, these high places, and they were often associated with Canaanite religions. So not getting rid of these was basically allowing other worship to take place, which is why it's bad that they stay up. But so not getting rid of the high places means other worship can take place, and that is not good. So although there's a lot of this promise, Joash reigns 40 years, which is really good, did what was right in the sight of the Lord, taking instruction from Jehoiada. There's this yet, this ominous yet. High places remained. So we'll see how that works out. Then Joash said to the priests, all the dedicated silver brought to the Lord's temple, census silver, silver from vows, and all the silver voluntarily given for the Lord's temple, each priest is to take it from his assessor and repair whatever damage is found in the temple. So Joash has this initiative to repair the temple. The temple is probably about 100 years old at this point since Solomon. And it's probably just suffered some wear and tear. Also, if Athaliah was serving other gods and neglecting the temple, that also could have been reasons why it needed to be repaired. But this is a good, honorable thing, right? Joash wants to restore the temple and use some silver and some things to bring repairs to it, to its damages. But we pick up here and it says, but by the 23rd year of the reign of King Joash, the priests had not repaired the damage. So Joash gave the decree, and yet 23 years later, the priests had not repaired the damage. So what's that all about? Well, keep reading. So King Joash called the police. He called the priest Jehoiada and the other priests and asked, "Why haven't you repaired the temple's damage? Since you haven't, don't take any silver from your assessors. Instead, hand it over to the repair of the temple." So the priests agreed that they would receive no silver from the people. It would not be the ones to repair the temple's damage. In other words, the priests, it seemed to be a breakdown with the priests. The priests hadn't been doing this. They hadn't been repairing it. It seemed like they had been receiving silver and money, but they hadn't been using it for the repair of the temple. So it's not very explicit here, but this seems to be some sort of rebuke on the priests. Commentators, different scholars disagree on that. I think I read 4 different commentaries on this whole section. 2 said this is an indictment. 2 said it didn't really matter. It was just a mishap. I don't know, but what we see is the temple's not being repaired and the priests can't be trusted to do it. So there's going to be another plan brought up here. And it's going to be where the people themselves do it. So then the priest Jehoiada took a chest, bored a hole in its lid, and set it beside the altar on the right side as one enters the Lord's temple. So check this out. You got a chest with a hole in it, and that's people as they were going into the temple, they're putting their silver in there. This is the first offering box, you know. This is why we should have offering boxes in our church service. Amen? Amen. That's not even a funny joke. Like, that's like a really bad pastor's joke. But anyway, okay. So he builds his offering box, and the priests who guarded the threshold put into the chest all the silver that was brought into the Lord's temple. Whenever they saw there was a large amount of silver in the chest, the king's secretary and the high priest would go bag up and tally the silver found in the Lord's temple. Then they would give the weighed silver to those doing the work, those who oversaw the Lord's temple. And this is the distinction. They were giving the silver to those to do the work. They weren't doing the work themselves. So they were giving others the silver for them to actually do the work. And these workers included, carpenters, builders, masons, stone cutters, and they themselves would use it to buy the timber and the stone to repair it, instead of the priests doing it. And you can also see, I think they go into detail because of all the accountability maybe that's built into this process. I can't really think of another reason that they would give us all this, but I think what it's showing is that there was accountability to the process. However, no silver bowls, wick, trimmers, sprinkling basins, trumpets, or any articles of gold or silver were made for the Lord's temple from the contributions brought to the Lord's temple. Instead, it was given to those doing the work, and they repaired the Lord's temple with it. In other words, none of the funds went to make temple utensils, is what they're saying. It all went for repair. It didn't go for the utensils in the temple. No, it all went to repair. And no accounting was required from the men because they were doing honest work with integrity. So, although there was some accountability in getting it from the boxes to the workers, once it went to the workers, they were people of integrity and they trusted them. All right, let's skip down to verse 17 here. Okay. Now, so all this was done, the repairs were happening, and then we get this kind of thing from left field. At that time, King Hazael of Aram marched up and fought against Gath and captured it. Then he had planned to attack Jerusalem. So Hazael is coming to attack Jerusalem. So King Joash of Judah took all the items consecrated. These are the sacred items, okay? Consecrated, holy things. Took all the holy things. By himself and by his ancestors, Judah's kings Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, and Ahaziah, as well as the gold found in the treasuries of the Lord's temple in the king's palaces, and he sent them to King Hazael of Aram. Then Hazael withdrew from Jerusalem. Okay, so there's no explicit kind of evaluation of Joash's payment of tribute here. They're not telling you whether this was good or bad. The narrator isn't. But I think there's a lot of things here that give the implication that this was not good. This was not a good thing that Joash did. He's basically bribing a foreign king, and that's never a good thing. He's apparently fearful of Hazael, and he's bribing him with the holy things of the temple, right? We've been reading all these good things about the temple, and the temple's been featured and prominent, and even Joash is repairing it and repairing the holy things. But now you have him taking the very holy things and giving them to a foreign king. And he doesn't own these things. The king doesn't own those things. He's not giving out of his own reserves. He's giving the things of God to this foreign king. So whereas, on the front end of Joash's story, you have this positive treatment of he restored holy things in the temple, he now uses those very holy things in an act of distrust. And I think it's inviting this contrast. That, yeah, he restored the holy things, but he also sent off the holy things to a foreign king because he was fearful. So one commentator says this: the tribute payment relieves Judah of an encroaching enemy, but it should not be regarded in a positive light. Payment of temple and palace treasuries, especially to a foreign king, negatively characterizes a king. It reveals he does not trust, he is not trusting Yahweh to deliver his people in a time of war. So this is not good. Not good at all. And notice it kind of just comes out of nowhere. It's very odd. Now what we read next, I think, comes even further out of nowhere, but it's in the same vein. The writer, compiler of Kings says this: the rest of the events of Joash's reign, along with all of his accomplishments, are written in the historical record of Judah's kings. So Kings, the book of Kings, is really a compilation of a lot of works, and it has no problem telling you, hey, if you want to read more about this, go read this other book. Or if you really want to know the story of Joash, go read this other thing. So it doesn't tell the full story, which tells you when you're reading Kings, it's highly selective. It's a very selective account of what it tells people. But here we see that the thing that they do include is that Joshua's servants conspired against him and attacked him at Beit Millo on the road that goes down to Silla. It was his servants Jozabad, son of Shemaeth, and Jehozabad, son of Shomer, who attacked him. He died, and they buried him with his ancestors in the city of David, and his son Amaziah became king in his place. So what happened? Well, basically, he was assassinated by his servants. One commentator says maybe this was because he sent off the holy things. Now, another way to kind of piece some things together is if you read 2 Chronicles 24. It also tells the story of Joash, but a bit differently. In the Old Testament, you have the book of Samuel and Kings, who tell the story of Israel as a nation. But then you also have 1 and 2 Chronicles that kind of recap that same story, but they give some different perspective to it on some things. And the story of Joash is one of those examples. It tells the story about how after Jehoiada dies, the priest who kind of mentored Joash, after this priest dies, the nation of Judah actually starts falling after Baal and other foreign gods. And Jehoiada's son, I think it's Zechariah, kind of prophesies against the nation, and Joash kills him. He kills Jehoiada's son for prophesying against the idolatry of Judah. And that's why he gets assassinated in Chronicles. But, I mean, lining those things up sometimes can be difficult. But at the very least, what we see is that Joash kind of fell apart there at the end. There was a lot of promise. There's a lot of good things. But he kind of falls apart. He fails at the end. So I think this is all a hint of Joash's complicated reign. Like, he's a complicated figure. We talked a lot about that with the person of Gideon and the judges. How these are kind of complicated figures. They're human. They're just human people that have good and bad. And I think that's true of Joash. But he did what was right in the eyes of Yahweh, but he did not remove the high places, right? We saw that. He repaired the temple with holy things, but he didn't trust Yahweh in battle, and he bribed a foreign king with holy things. And there's some ambiguity in his death here. Like, he gets assassinated. It doesn't seem like that would be good. And if you compare that to 2 Chronicles 24, you understand that, he just wasn't doing the right thing. So one commentator says this, in Joash, once again, a king succeeds and fails at the same time. His failure, however, does not negate the good he does for Yahweh and his people. And the combination of success and failure all tied up into one, in this summary of the king highlights that Yahweh acts graciously through fallible, third time's the charm, people. Like, we talked about this with Gideon. The fact that the Bible, the Hebrew Bible especially, lifts up very human heroes and heroes that fail, it points to the real hero being Yahweh. It points to the real hero, who's Yahweh. So in Joash, we have a hopeful story of God's provision for the Davidic line, but it ends with disappointment. What starts out hopeful ends with disappointment. One scholar says that the story of Joash points to the disappointment of all merely human leadership. In other words, men and women leaders will fail us and disappoint us. No person can bear the weight of gaining our eternal approval or satisfaction. People fail us. In the environment that we're currently in, as a church, as a nation, there's a lot of stories of fallen leaders and of disappointing leaders. But even personally, maybe you have a story like that where someone has just deeply disappointed you. I think if you live long enough, you're going to have one or two of those stories. And I think as we think about Joash, yes, he had a disappointing end to his rule and reign. And it's unfortunate, but he was just one disappointing leader. And it doesn't outdo all the good that he did do. And it doesn't disqualify him from being part of God's plan. That's the crazy thing, is God still worked through him and ultimately through the line of David to bring Jesus. And Jesus is the faithful one who will never let us down. So I think we see a model here just for how we can acknowledge our disappointments, but how we should also never allow them to blind us from the big picture or the end of the story. So what I want you to do, just kind of end out the time. This is a little different, but I want you to just take a few minutes to share with one another a time where you struggled with disappointment. It could be deep, it could be shallow, whatever you're comfortable with, but share that. And as you listen to people around the table, maybe there's just a way for you to encourage one another with the big picture. Encourage one another by saying that, hey, Jesus is the saving King who loves you and cares for you even in our disappointments. And just find ways to encourage one another and share in one another's struggles with it if you can. So close your time with that. Maybe one person can volunteer to go first and just be like, this is a time I've struggled with disappointment, or this is how I'm struggling with disappointment right now. And just, go around the table, and then maybe close your time in prayer for one another. And that we can call it a day. Okay? Sorry if I was a little scatterbrained on this one. Just hopping into the middle of Kings is a little difficult. But hopefully this has been an encouragement to you, and hopefully your time at your tables is even better. All right.